Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Bob Paulinski, Master of Wine. What's the most undervalued wine region in Italy? For me, I'm convinced it's Abruzzo. I believe this place will get a lot more attention in the not too distant future because the wines are just sensational. I'm going to take a deep dive into one specific wine there. That's Montepulciano D'Abruzzo. It's something I've drank for years and I feel is one of the very best values around. Now, I've made many trips to Italy over the years, but this is the first time I've been to Abruzzo. This video will detail that trip. I was with a group of journalists from the US and Canada. The trip itinerary was set by an organizing group with the regional Consorzio, so I had to go with the flow. There was no rest for the weary. After 15 hours of air travel, the group gathered at the airport in Rome, and we started a new day full speed ahead. We drove for hours east through on and off rain. As we continued through the mountains, the landscape became increasingly rural. At times, there was barely another vehicle in sight. Along the way, we encountered an occasional mobile bottling line truck, and of course, there were plenty of grapevines and mixed agriculture. The scenery was astounding, and even though I was seriously sleep deprived, there was no chance of me dozing off and missing out on the views. By the time we reached the more remote locations, there was some very choppy roads that were barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass. During the course of this trip, I had a chance to taste a few hundred different wines. Now, I have a better appreciation for Trebbiano and Pecorino and Cerasuolo d'Abruzzo, but for me, Montepulciano d'Abruzzo is where it's at. If there was ever a wine that deserved more recognition, this is it. The labeling is rather straightforward. Montepulciano refers to the grape variety, Abruzzo refers to the place of origin. The wines must be at least 85% Montepulciano, but in reality, many are 100%. The wines must also conform to grape yield guidelines and minimum alcohol content. Some of the subzones have more restrictive rules, and there are separate rules for the Reserva wines as well. The region produces more than 22 million cases of wine per year. That ranks 7th in Italy. The wines will range anywhere from that under $10 to several $100 per bottle, with the vast majority being in the $15 to $30 range within the US. So why are the wines from Abruzzo not better known? There's a few factors that come into play, and one is the history of the region. For a long period of time, and to some degree even today, it was based much more on high quantity versus quality. That's weighed on the overall image of the region. The other is it's not a prime tourist area. Yeah, there's some great beaches there, but places like Veneto, Tuscany, see much better exposure with tourists. The wines have much more of a better chance of becoming known through that vehicle. The other is Montepulciano as a name is very confusing. It's a grape variety, but it's also a town in Tuscany. Think of some of the wines from that area, like Vino Nobile Montepulciano. The one I have in front of me here, Rosso di Montepulciano. It's very confusing. You have a grape variety in a town that's completely unrelated. And the third is it's very difficult to know the style in which you're buying. And that's what I'm hoping to bring to this video. A little more clarity in terms of when you buy Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, what is it that you can expect to find in your wine glass? The changes that are playing out in Abruzzo are very clear. It's all about improved quality, less focus on quantity. This is a huge change from the history of this region. When you travel around, the vibe is very good. The energy there is positive as well. Also, visiting the vineyards. This is where I believe much of the change is playing out. Greater selectivity in terms of where vineyards are planted, better clonal diversity, lower yields, meticulous care to ensure that the grape quality is very good. And when that raw material is right, your chance of making top-notch wines are greatly improved. There's also an embrace of eco-friendly methods, and I don't mean this in a marketing sense. This has much more to do with, again, driving the improvement in the vineyard itself, the vine health, the soil health, the fruit quality. All of this seems to be a uber focus. And the last bit, oftentimes in Italy, you'll hear these stories of the aging population and who's going to carry on to the next generation. Well, it may just be a fluke on this trip, but many of the wineries visited had young people that were playing key roles within the wineries. I believe this is going to drive a good amount of change and fresh energy, and this, I believe, will be a driving force for the positive for this region. Along the way, I had the chance to attend a major trade show that focused solely on the wines from Abruzzo. This was the single largest tasting of Abruzzo wines that I had ever attended. It was a walk around event that provided a chance to taste extensively from throughout the region. I made the rounds with a wine writer friend of mine from Montreal. Also, along the way, I met Matthew Horkey, fellow wine YouTuber. Great guy. We shared a lot of laughs together. At the trade event, I tasted over 100 wines from 35 different producers. Then I attended a master class on Montepulciano D'Abruzzo. I had hoped to get clarity on the styles, as there is a high degree of variability. In general terms, the wines are sourced either from flatter sites that are near the sea, others are more hilly and further inland. There's also a lighter style, which brings a lot of primary fruit. There's more of a mid-weight that has a bit more concentration. And then finally, there's the fuller style that brings even more weight still. In terms of wine making, some of the wines come out of concrete vats. This is an old technique that's now back in fashion. But also, there's a good number that come out of stainless steel, some out of amphora. Others come out of large oak that's neutral. And increasingly, the use of small barrel French oak is used for the most tricked out versions. As for the winery visits, Zaccagnini is one of the rock solid sources in terms of value. The production is large and the wines are sold broadly in many markets around the world. This panoramic vineyard shot was taken from the observation deck just outside of the winery. Overall, the wines are very solid examples, more in mid-weight style, very consistent from year to year. This is the most common label. The vine cutting is actually attached by hand. This is the perfect place to be introduced to the wines from the region. Next up was one of my favorite stops during the entire trip. The producer is called Nicodemi. This is a small producer, very artisanal, beautiful place, very modern, hillside vineyards, many older vines, meticulous care taken out in the vineyards itself. We tasted through a wide range of wines there, and this was the many different versions that you can find within Montepulciano. This was probably the most educational tasting during the entire trip. The production here is not huge. It's only about 16,000 cases. The wines are going to be a bit tougher to find, but I'll post what information I have in the description down below. Easily the most anticipated stop was to Medio Pepe. This is one of the classic, most iconic producers, not only in Italy, but in the entire world. The wines are rare, they're expensive. This is a top producer that is very meticulous about every detail. They maintain old inventory that's stored in underground cellars. Get a look at this. Everything is stocked by hand. Vintages go back several decades. The wines are aged in this manner until they're ready to be sold into the marketplace. Now, here we had a tasting that went back to 2003. The word on most Montepulciano d'Abruzzo is they can age maybe 6, 8, 10 years. I've had some that have aged longer than that with no trouble, but for this specific producer, the wines can hold on for decades. Now, the wines are not going to be easy to find, and if you can find them, absolutely pick it up. It's going to be a rare treat. Also, during the tasting, we met one of the new family members who wasn't too happy about being left out of the tasting. Broadly speaking, the wines will fall into one of three categories. And where I'm starting out is the entry level. Wine is called Folare. It's from a producer called Galasso. Really don't know much about them at all, but it's a large producer. And this is more of that entry level price point. Screw cap, a little stubborn screw cap. This one I picked up at a local shop for under $10. This is very much what I expect old school Montepulciano to be. For opening price point, this doesn't look bad. The color's moderately deep. It does have a bit of a purpley color, very typical of Montepulciano when it's young. There's some fade as you get out to the rim of the glass, so I don't expect a huge amount of concentration. Entry-level Montepulciano d'Abruzzo typically will have alcohol levels around 12. I see this one is just a tick over that. Aromatics, not bad. A little bit like dark cherry, smells a little bit like pomegranate, a bit spicy. Very simple, clean style. Very common with what you'll find at this entry level. Oftentimes, these are going to be wines that are sourced from areas that are very warm. The fruit gets quickly mature, the sugar level spikes, but there's not phenolic maturity in the grapes themselves. And what that'll mean is you'll get wines that'll have some decent alcohol levels to them, but there's oftentimes a little bit of an underlying green note. This wine has that. It's not off-putting. I think this is really quite a solid effort, but this is a good representation of what you'll find at the entry level for Montepulciano D'Abruzzo. The second wine falls in more of a mid-level Montepulciano. It has a bit more body to it, 13.5 alcohol, a little riper, fuller, more concentrated. Massiarelli is the producer name. This wine is actually exported to a good number of countries, around 50 around the world. So there's a decent chance you can find this wherever you're at. In the US, I actually picked this up at a Costco not too long ago for about $9. Typically that price is going to be more in the mid-teens, so this was just a screaming deal at that price. But this is a 2019 vintage, and it does have a little more fade in the color, which is expected versus the first wine because of the added age, but it still has a bit of that purple color. Aromatics, very nice. Good intensity. Again, that dark cherry note shows up again. It has a black olive characteristic to it. It reminds me a bit of sage, dried sage leaves, but really nice aromatics. On the palate, there's good ripeness, good weight. Compared to the first wine, this doesn't have any of that underlying green character. You can tell the raw material for this wine was much better than the previous wine. Good structure, good length, good weight to it. The tannin level on these wines are generally not going to be all that high. There's some good structure and good weight to it, but the tannin levels are actually quite moderate. And therefore, the wines do show very well at a young age, but because of the weight and build of the wines, they actually can have some ageability as well. As I mentioned, some of them have very long ageability. In this case, I think this wine at about 4 years old certainly can keep for another couple of years, but it's drinking very well at the present time. The third and final one is ticking more into a top tier Montepulciano D'Abruzzo, even though it's really not all that expensive. I think I paid around $25 for this. It's from a producer called Catena Milianico, and the wine is called Montepulciano. It's a 2021 vintage. This is all from Hillside Vineyards, estate grown. It does get 12 months in oak. The alcohol level on this wine is 13.5. Color density, very good. It extends to the rim of the glass. Again, it has that telltale purple color to it. Aromatics, this thing just sings with that dark cherry character, but you do get that smoky charred oak note as well. Very good intensity. Also, there's black olive and a roasted coffee character to it as well. The aromatics are just great. Now, in terms of the flavor profile, this wine is rounder. It's got more intensity. It's broader than the first two examples that I tasted. This is much more of a complete wine. I would say this wine would have no trouble aging 3 or 4 more years easily. But because the tannin levels are not all that high at this point, I think the wine actually drinks quite beautifully now, even though the structure and weight is there to carry it for some years down the road. The wines are very versatile at the table. The better versions will have weight, good structure, solid fruit intensity, sometimes a little bit of oak influence, but there's just enough tannin there to cleanse the palate. They're fantastic with a broad range of foods, red meats, pasta, roasted chicken, roasted mushrooms, and alike. I hope this video inspired you to go out and experiment a bit with Montepulciano D'Abruzzo. There's a lot of great things happening there. If you've stayed around to this point, please do consider subscribing if you already haven't done so. Hit the bell. It'll keep you up to speed on all the things happening with this channel. Hit that like button. It's very much appreciated. I know I'm going to be drinking well tonight. I hope you are too. And until next time, I'll see you somewhere out in the wine world. Cheers.